There are moments in history that sound like thunder, tearing apart the silent sky of the century. That night, the whole of Africa was shocked when Emmanuel Macron, President of France, stood in the international spotlight and coldly said, "African leaders are ungrateful." Just one sentence, but it touched a wound that has never closed, the wound of centuries of being robbed, humiliated, and despised. In the tense silence of the diplomatic halls, a young man stood up. Ibrahim Traoré, the leader from Burkina Faso, not only rebutted, but also threw the fire of defiance back into Paris. He did not speak with personal anger, but with the voice of hundreds of millions of African souls. This is not a dialogue. This is a declaration of spiritual war. Backhand index pointing right if you believe this truth needs to be spread. Leave your thoughts right now. On that 5th of March, Emmanuel Macron appeared before the European press, his face arrogant and his tone condescending. He declared, without the French army, the Sahel countries would no longer exist. African leaders must be grateful. The words fell like a knife cutting deep into the memory of the Black Continent. The French media hastily painted it as obvious truth. But in Ouagadougou, Bamako, Niamey, public opinion was in an uproar. People asked each other, what gratitude can repay the blood, resources, and dignity that have been taken away for centuries? It was at this moment that Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward. Not just to respond, but to change the whole story. And from here, the fire would flare. There are words that are more than words. They carry within them a system of oppression, a legacy of arrogance. When Macron exclaimed that Africa is ungrateful, it was not simply a careless remark. It was a powerful statement. A chilling reminder that in Paris' eyes, the Sahel nations were still children who needed to be taught. It was not the speech of a president in the 21st century, but an echo from the darkness of the 19th century. And then, in the stifled silence, another voice rang out. It was not diplomatic softness, nor did it bend to pressure. It was the voice of Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader from Burkina Faso. He spoke not as a single politician, but as the representative of a continent that had been ignored for too long. In his eyes, we are not human beings, Traoré declared. The sentence cut through the international air like a sword, forcing everyone to listen. Because it was not just the anger of a leader, but the echo of millions of voices suppressed over centuries. Macron's speech stirred up memories that the French had wanted to bury. In Dakar, the tirailleurs Senegalese veterans, who had shed blood for France in 2 world wars, sat silently, tears streaming down their faces. They recalled that when they returned home, no one called them heroes, no one gave them back their dignity. In Niger, miners working under pale yellow lights still toiled to extract uranium to light up Paris, while their villages were plunged into darkness. In Burkina Faso, arid fields still writhed under exhaustion, while gold from the ground poured into European banks. That is why Macron's words became the last straw. It not only insulted the heads of state, it exposed the whole truth, that the relationship between France and Africa is still bound by invisible chains. Chains wrapped in beautiful words, cooperation, protection, stability. But behind it all lies dependence, manipulation, and a kind of false sovereignty. Ibrahim Traoré chose the moment to say what millions of people were thinking but no one dared to say. He not only rebutted Macron, but also changed the trajectory of the conversation. From Africa being grateful, he turned it around to ask, who is truly ungrateful? In a speech broadcast live from Ouagadougou, Traoré looked straight into the camera, his voice firm. If anyone is ungrateful, it is France. They owe their existence to our ancestors. We have shed blood in wars that were not ours. We have provided gold, diamonds, wood, and today uranium so that France can maintain its light. And our people? They are still in darkness. The room fell silent, then exploded in applause. On social media, each word spread like wildfire. In Bamako, young people chanted Traoré's name. In Niamey, students wrote on walls, "We are not ungrateful. We are human beings." In Abidjan, tricolor flags burned in the night. This is no longer a personal debate. This is a generational shift in consciousness. When Macron speaks of grace, he evokes a stark truth, that Africa has long been taught to be grateful for things that were never gifts. But when Traoré retorts, he opens a giant mirror to the continent. In that mirror, Africans see themselves, not as recipients of favors, but as the people who built, sacrificed, and nurtured Western civilization itself. That is why, from Nigeria to Ghana, from Ethiopia to South Africa, public opinion is shaken. Commentators are calling it Africa's second war of independence. There are no more guns, no more flagpoles being lowered. This time, the weapons are words, and the battlefield is ideology. But Paris cannot sit idly by. Just a day later, French Foreign Ministry officials spoke up, trying to correct that Macron only wanted to emphasize the role of cooperation. However, all excuses fell on deaf ears. People no longer believe sweet words. The French media has been covering the story, but unintentionally it has made Traoré's words more widespread. Instead of calming him down, they have made him the center of attention. Major European newspapers asked, "Has France lost Africa?" Meanwhile, the African press unanimously praised Traoré, the voice of dignity. At this point, the world understood that an earthquake had begun. And that earthquake did not stop in Burkina Faso. It spread across the Sahel, then down the continent. In the markets of Ouagadougou, traders were talking non-stop. An old man said, "I used to hear Sankara talk about real independence. But today, I see Traoré rekindling that flame." In Bamako, rappers wrote new songs praising the leader for daring to tell the truth. In Niamey, women gathered in the sun, holding banners that read, "We are not ungrateful." Traoré's power lies not in his title, nor in his audacity. It lies in the fact that he has tapped into a common pain, turning it into a collective voice. And it is at this climax that we must pause to ask ourselves, is this just a personal reaction? Or is it the beginning of a new era for Africa? If you believe that Traoré's voice belongs not just to Burkina Faso, but to a continent rising, share your thoughts in the comments. Because every word you write is a brick in a new wall, a wall of dignity and sovereignty. In that moment, the world realized, this is no longer a story about Macron and Traoré. This is a story about a continent that has been ignored for too long, and is now finding its voice. The story is not over. It has only just begun, and the fire will burn even more fiercely in the following episodes. France is ungrateful, not us, Ibrahim Traoré said, and the words rang out like an indictment. It was more than just a rebuttal to an insult. It overturned a millennium, forcing Paris to confront its own past. For if we want to talk about gratitude, who owes it? Who has drained the blood, resources, and strength of a continent, and then demands more bowing? From here, the confrontation is no longer a diplomatic dispute. It becomes a historical trial. And Africa, with Traoré as prosecutor, has brought France to justice. To understand the weight of those words, we must look back. Millions of Africans were shackled, loaded onto slave ships, and taken to Europe and the New World. In the plantations of the Caribbean, their sweat and blood fed empires. In the sugar, tobacco, cotton mills, every drop of sweat fell to make Paris and Bordeaux prosperous. However, when Macron demands gratitude, he deliberately forgets that. He forgets that France's wealth was built not only by the French, but by the sweat of dispossessed people. That history cannot be erased. It is the foundation of every building, every bank, every glory that France has ever had. In every gaze in Dakar, Lagos, Ouagadougou, people still feel the beat of these memories. No one can call them ungrateful when they are the ones who are forgotten in textbooks, erased from monuments, but are the silent pillars that built the West. Not just slaves. When the world was plunged into 2 world wars, who was dragged in to be cannon fodder? African soldiers, called tirailleurs sénégalais, were mobilized from all over the colony. Sent to Verdun, the Somme, Normandy. They fought for a flag that was not theirs, defending a country that had never defended them. So many fell, but French history only remembers the white generals. So much blood was spilled in the mud, but when the war was over, the soldiers who survived were abandoned, without pensions, without honors. They were marginalized as tools whose mission had been completed. Traoré recalled all of that. They owe us their survival, he emphasized. Because without those black soldiers, could France hold its head high after the war? So who was truly ungrateful? The colonial history left behind another huge debt: resources. France extracted gold from Burkina Faso, uranium from Niger, cocoa from the Ivory Coast, oil from Gabon, wood from Congo. Train after train, container after container loaded with products left African ports, flowing to Paris, Marseille, Le Havre. What did the indigenous people get in return? Roads for transporting resources. Not for rural development. Rudimentary hospitals. Schools that taught children to bow their heads. Niger's uranium, in particular, became the most blatant symbol. While Paris was ablaze with nuclear power, 80% of Niger's population remained in darkness. And yet Macron spoke of favors. That history could no longer be hidden. In subsequent speeches, Traoré did not stop at indignation. He carefully put together each piece of history, building a clear indictment. Africans were enslaved, without compensation, without recognition. Africans shed blood on the battlefield, without honor. Without proper pay. Africans lost resources, in return for poverty, war, and dependence. We paid with blood, sweat, land. And they dare to ask us to thank them. No, they should bow their heads. Traoré said loudly. The accusation confused French leaders. Diplomats quickly denied it, saying it was just a misunderstanding. But Africans no longer wanted to listen. Because every word Traoré said was linked to the collective memory of millions of families. In Ivory Coast, veterans held old photos, pointing to the faces of their loved ones who had fallen in the war. In Niger, children study in dark classrooms, hearing their parents repeat, "The uranium of this land lights up Paris." But we study in the dark. In Burkina Faso, young people gather, holding banners, "We owe France nothing." What scares Paris most is not anger, but awakening. When Traoré said, "France is ungrateful," he redefined the relationship. From Africa being forced to be grateful, Africa now asks, why be grateful? And more than that, why not reclaim what is ours? This is the turning point. Once this thinking spreads, every pillar of power that France has built for centuries will be shaken. There will be no psychological foundation of obedience, no moral cover for military presence. If you feel that Traoré's words are a truth that has been hidden for too long, please share your thoughts below this article. Remember, every comment, every share is a hammer blow to the wall of silence. And that wall, only we, the people, have the power to break down. Not only Burkina Faso, but also Mali, Niger, Guinea, even Senegal were shaken. Journalists called this the Traoré wave. He became a symbol of resistance, not only because of his strong words, but because he said what everyone thought but no one dared to say out loud. In Europe, many people were surprised, a young leader of a small country could shake Paris. But in Africa, they understood, this is not personal power, but the power of history. The indictment that Traoré built changed the political atmosphere. From now on, the world no longer saw Macron as a president making harmless statements, but as a symbol of a colonial past that never ended. And the world no longer sees Traoré as just the leader of Burkina Faso, but as the prosecutor of all Africa. In this war, the question has been raised, if we talk about ingratitude, who is really to blame? There are moments when history no longer belongs to the diplomatic hall, no longer belongs to empty speeches, but belongs to the underground movement of rising peoples. After Ibrahim Traoré's thunderous response, what happened was not just a Paris-Ouagadougou dispute, but a shift in the entire mental map of Africa. Macron may have thought he was just teaching a young president, but he touched the most painful nerve of a continent, and the shockwaves spread far beyond expectations. From Dakar to Kinshasa, from Lusaka to Dar es Salaam, editorials, forums, and street conversations revolve around the same question: who is ungrateful? People remember the blood of African soldiers who died in 2 world wars to protect Paris. They remember the millions of tons of uranium from Niger, gold from Mali, cocoa from Côte d'Ivoire, cotton from Burkina Faso, all of which fueled the French economy, but in return brought poverty and contempt. Macron's words inadvertently triggered a collective memory, a memory like a volcano pent up for centuries. In Lagos, students held banners reading, "We are not ungrateful, we are unforgiven." In Nairobi, young people shared a series of videos analyzing and recalling colonial history. In Bamako, artists composed songs mocking Macron, which went viral on TikTok millions of times. An uncontrollable wave, a wave that no one in the Élysée Palace predicted. In that context, Ibrahim Traoré was no longer the president of a small country. He became an icon. Photos of Traoré in military uniform, his eyes resolute, standing before thousands of young people. Spread everywhere. On social media, people called him the new Mandela, Sankara reborn, a warrior of the 21st century. The strange thing is that it was Macron's contempt that created the conditions for Traoré to sublimate. Like an arrow released from a bow when fully drawn. In international forums, when reporters asked about ingratitude, Traoré calmly replied, "Gratitude cannot be forced. Gratitude is only for those who gave us freedom. Not chains." A simple sentence, but quoted by millions, printed on shirts, carved on walls, and turned into a slogan for a generation. The aftershocks were not only in Africa, but also globally. In Latin America, commentators compared Macron to the Spanish colonists of the 16th century. In Asia, many major newspapers such as Global Times China or the Hindu India reported, the verbal uprising from Ouagadougou shakes Paris. Even in Europe, not everyone stood by Macron. Some French, German, and Belgian intellectuals openly wrote critical articles, arguing that his words revived imperial memories and shot France in the foot in its relations with Africa. The Élysée palace panicked. They did not expect that a seemingly innocuous statement would turn into a political storm. The advisors tried to put out the fire, but the more they tried to put out the fire, the more wrong they were. They launched a media campaign saying that France has given billions of dollars in aid to Africa. But people immediately asked, if it really is aid, why are our people still starving, while French companies are getting rich? The excuse turned out to be incriminating evidence. What is more important, for the first time, African countries began to see each other not as fragments, but as a unified whole. Mali's foreign minister said, when Traoré speaks, we hear our own voice. Niger's representative declared, we are not ungrateful. We are just asking for justice. And a series of Sahel countries announced that they would increase intra-bloc cooperation, gradually reducing their dependence on France. That awakening was like a waterfall that had burst its banks. Where before, the protests were just isolated sparks, in Mali, Burkina, Niger, Macron has now inadvertently turned them into a continent-wide fire. A movement that no one can stop, the Reclaim African Dignity movement. As the tide of public opinion rose, Traoré and his Sahel allies went beyond words. They began to act. Burkina Faso signed a new military training agreement with Russia and negotiated with China for infrastructure investment without going through Paris. Mali announced the end of all remaining military agreements with France. Niger negotiated directly with Turkey to sell uranium. Each action was a slap in the face to Macron. Each decision was a brick removed from the wall that France had built to lock Africa down for centuries. And the scariest thing for Paris, Africans were unanimous in their support. On the streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, Niamey, thousands of people carrying national flags chanted, "We are not ungrateful. We are free." The French media began to ask, had Macron made a strategic mistake? Had he inadvertently turned Traoré into a global political rival? Some French parliamentarians even admitted, we are losing the image war in Africa. But it was too late. Traoré's image towered on the graffiti walls of Johannesburg, on the street art of Dakar, on the t-shirts of young people in Nairobi. It was a soft power that no French advertising campaign could stop. Africa was rising. And Macron, in his attempt to prove the continent's ungratefulness, had made himself a living testament to an era of rule that Northwest longer had any place. But every epic story has a climax. And every climax contains a paradox. As Traoré became the flag, as the movement spread, France could no longer sit idly by. Paris began to prepare a counterattack. Not with weapons, at least not yet, but with diplomacy, media, and even behind-the-scenes intrigue. And this is the premise for the next part, the part where the seemingly defeated will try to come back, and it is in this counterattack that the world will witness an unexpected turning point. Backhand index pointing right. If you think Traoré speaks not only for Burkina Faso but for the entire continent, share your views now. No empire can accept defeat in silence. After the political shock caused by Traoré's response, Paris began to counterattack. But instead of stopping the storm, every blow was like a headwind, hitting the attacker even harder. And it was in this paradox that history turned in an unexpected direction. Immediately, Macron instructed the French Foreign Ministry to launch an international campaign. They sent a note to the European Union, asking to condemn the wave of anti-French extremism in Africa. But what they received in return was only awkward silence. European countries, which also bear the vestiges of colonialism, hesitated to stand by Macron, afraid of being reminded of their own past. At the United Nations, the French ambassador called for respect for the sacrifices France has made for the security of the Sahel. But immediately, the African delegation unanimously retorted, "What security? When the French army itself is protecting the plundering of resources." The whole hall shook. Not stopping there, Paris spent tens of millions of euros to create a media campaign, documentaries praising France's civilizing role, talk shows recalling generous aid, articles saying Africans cannot stand on their own without Paris. But in the 21st century, the truth is no longer in the hands of a few mainstream newspapers. Young Africans cut together videos, compared data, and exposed every single aid figure that flowed back into the pockets of French companies. The hashtag Ungrateful Macron exploded, spreading across Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook. In just 72 hours, the message that Paris had painstakingly crafted was crushed into a joke. Not stopping at words, France tried to use covert methods. Leaked sources showed that pro-French NGOs in Ouagadougou were given money to organize anti-Traoré protests. But just a few days later, people discovered that the money given to protesters came from an account linked to the French embassy. The trick was too clumsy. Instead of shaking Traoré's position, it made the people even more angry. In the squares, the slogan rang out, "No one can buy the dignity of Burkina Faso." A country once considered small, now became the center of resistance across the continent. Macron thought he was consolidating his image as a strong leader. But in the eyes of the world, he became a symbol of an old empire, lost in the new era. On the contrary, Traoré, the young president, appeared as the embodiment of the future, daring to speak, daring to stand, daring to confront. It was France's clumsy counterattack that created the paradox. The one who intended to destroy became the one who raised the opponent to a higher level. Like a statue that was toppled, Macron collapsed on the international stage, while Traoré stood tall amid cheers. After these events, Burkina Faso was no longer a small dot on the map. It became the center of the African awakening. Young leaders from Ghana, Congo, Tanzania began to cite Traoré as an example. Student movements adopted his words as slogans. The fragments were coming together to form a unified picture. And in the moment when Paris thought it had taken back the initiative, the truth was revealed: no one was afraid anymore. Africa had learned to stand up, and Macron had unwittingly become the creator of that moment. Such is the twist of history: the one who struck fell, the one who was targeted rose to become a symbol. And from here, the story was no longer that of a president, nor of a nation. It was the epic of a continent reclaiming its dignity. Traoré had won the battle of words. The movement had won the battle of spirit. And now the world is waiting. What will be the next step? If you believe that Paris's counterattack only sheds light on the truth, share your voice so that more people will know about this story. History has closed a chapter, but not with silence, but with a thunderous call to the continent. Macron wanted to bury Africa in the two words, ungrateful, but those words became the final hoe to break the grave of colonialism. And from that land of suffering, a new generation rose. Ibrahim Traoré is not just a president. He is a mirror of a common aspiration, the aspiration to live as free, equal human beings. No longer defined by anyone. Burkina Faso is fighting not only for itself, but also for the continent's voice, which has been choked for centuries. Today, every square, every school, every social network can be the front line of that spirit. The fire has been lit, and keeping it burning is the responsibility of all of us. Backhand index pointing right if the spirit of Ibrahim Traoré touches your heart. Please like, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. Backhand index pointing right. Don't just watch, be part of this journey. Now it's our turn, the generation responsible for writing this epic, so that the flame of freedom never goes out.